August 7, 1942. Japanese 17th Army Headquarters, Rabaul, New Britain. Lieutenant General Hyakutake Harukichi studied intelligence reports of American landings on Guadalcanal with professional interest rather than alarm. His chief medical officer, Colonel Horiuchi Toyokazu, stood before the operations map, pointing to the malarial zones surrounding Henderson Field, where U.S. Marines had just established positions. The Americans have landed in one of the most disease-ridden regions in the Pacific, Horiuchi explained, with confidence born from experience. Guadalcanal's Anopheles mosquito population is among the densest we've encountered. Malaria infection rates in our garrison exceeded 80% before reinforcement. Dengue fever is endemic. Dysentery is universal. Fungal infections are inevitable in this humidity. Hyakutake nodded, reviewing casualty projections. How long before disease incapacitates the American force? 4 to 6 weeks, General. The Marines landed in tropical summer, peak mosquito season. They lack natural immunity to local malaria strains. Their medical services, designed for temperate warfare, will be overwhelmed. Historical precedent is clear. European forces in tropical environments suffered disease casualties exceeding combat losses by ratios of 10 to 1 or greater. The Americans will either evacuate or die of disease. The general's strategic assessment reflected this confidence. Then we need not commit major forces immediately. Disease will do our work. When their combat strength collapses from malaria, we recapture the airfield with minimal effort. The jungle is our ally. Let it destroy them. What Hyakutake and his medical staff didn't know, what no Japanese commander could have anticipated, was that at that precise moment, American pharmaceutical plants were producing over 3 million antimalarial tablets daily. Within 3 months, the U.S. Army would distribute Atabrine suppressive therapy to every soldier in the Pacific, alongside systematic mosquito control, comprehensive medical evacuation, and public health measures that would reduce malaria from expected campaign-ending catastrophe to manageable medical challenge. The Japanese strategy of allowing tropical disease to defeat American forces would collapse against industrial-scale pharmaceutical production, systematic medical logistics, and public health doctrine that transformed the Pacific from malarial death trap into survivable theater. The jungle that Japanese commanders expected to destroy American forces would instead witness American medical triumph that enabled every subsequent offensive from Guadalcanal to the Philippines. This story is about how natural environmental advantages evaporated before medical mass production, how centuries of tropical disease supremacy were defeated by systematic public health programs, and how American pharmaceutical industry achieved in months what evolution couldn't accomplish in millennia: protection against malaria at the scale of armies. The disease that Japanese commanders counted on as strategic weapon would be neutralized by tablets produced at rates the Japanese pharmaceutical industry couldn't imagine, delivered through logistics systems they couldn't match, administered through medical discipline they couldn't enforce. Japanese confidence in tropical disease as strategic ally rested on substantial historical precedent and contemporary experience. Since the 16th century, European military expeditions to tropical regions had been devastated by disease. The British Jamaica expedition of 1655 lost 85% of forces to yellow fever and malaria. The French expedition to Haiti in 1802-1803 saw 50,000 of 65,000 troops die from disease. The American expedition to Cuba in 1898 suffered disease casualties exceeding combat losses by 7 to 1. These historical patterns reinforce Japanese strategic assumptions. Western forces lacking natural immunity to tropical diseases and unfamiliar with preventive measures suffered catastrophic casualties when operating in equatorial environments. Japanese forces, conversely, came predominantly from regions with endemic malaria. While they still suffered disease casualties, infection rates were lower and immunity more common among troops from Kyushu, Taiwan, and Korea, where malaria was prevalent. Japanese military medical doctrine incorporated tropical disease as strategic factor in defensive planning. The 1941 Japanese Army Medical Corps manual specifically noted tropical diseases, particularly malaria, dengue, and dysentery, provide natural defensive advantage in southern regions. Enemy forces from temperate climates will suffer disproportionate disease casualties. Medical logistics should emphasize treating our forces while allowing disease to degrade enemy effectiveness. This doctrine was validated during the 1942 campaigns. Japanese forces captured Singapore, Philippines, and Dutch East Indies with remarkable speed, but tropical disease immediately began affecting occupying forces. Malaria infection rates among Japanese troops in New Guinea exceeded 70% by May 1942. Units stationed in the Solomon Islands reported 80–85% malaria rates. Dengue fever struck entire battalions. Dysentery was endemic, but Japanese medical staff calculated that American forces would suffer even worse. Colonel Horiuchi Toyokazu, chief medical officer for the 17th Army, submitted detailed projections to General Hyakutake in June 1942 based on malaria epidemiology in the Southwest Pacific. Anopheles punctulatus, mosquitoes in the Solomon Islands carry Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax malaria at high transmission rates. Non-immune populations face near-universal infection within 8 to 12 weeks of exposure. Without effective antimalarial prophylaxis, 60–80% of infected individuals will develop debilitating symptoms requiring hospitalization. American forces lack quinine reserves adequate for prophylactic use. Global supply is controlled by Japanese occupation of Java and Sumatra, which produce 90% of world's quinine. Synthetic antimalarials exist but are not manufactured at scale necessary for military use. American medical doctrine is designed for European warfare, not tropical disease management. Conclusion: American forces deployed to Solomon Islands will suffer disease casualties, rendering them combat ineffective within 2 months. Evacuation requirements will exceed medical transport capacity. Disease will accomplish what combat cannot: removal of American threat to our southern defensive perimeter. This assessment seemed validated when the 1st Marine Division landed on Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942. Initial Japanese military response was limited precisely because commanders expected disease to destroy the American force. Why commit major reinforcements to retake positions that tropical illness would render untenable for the Americans within weeks? The Marines who landed on Guadalcanal entered exactly the environment Japanese medical officers described. Guadalcanal's northern coastal region, where Henderson Field was located, featured swamps, rivers, and dense jungle, perfect Anopheles mosquito breeding habitat. The island's isolation meant no natural immunity among indigenous populations or occupying forces. Historical reports from British colonial administrators documented malaria rates exceeding 90% among non-immune populations. Initial American medical preparation proved inadequate. The 1st Marine Division medical officers brought quinine supplies sufficient for treating acute malaria cases but insufficient for mass prophylaxis. Mosquito control equipment was minimal: some netting, limited insecticide, insufficient drainage materials. Medical evacuation capacity was constrained by limited shipping and priority for combat supplies. Within 2 weeks of landing, Marines began developing malaria symptoms. By late August, the division medical log recorded 75 malaria cases. By September, daily new cases exceeded 50. Hospital capacity was overwhelmed. Troops remained in combat positions while suffering fever, chills, and debilitating weakness that reduced combat effectiveness catastrophically. Navy Corpsman James Fahey, serving with Marine artillery units, described the disease environment in his diary. August 28th. The mosquitoes are unbearable. You can't sleep without netting, and even then they find ways through. Half the battery is sick with fever, malaria or dengue. Nobody's sure. The corpsmen are overwhelmed. We're losing more men to disease than to Japanese attacks. If this continues, we won't have enough healthy men to defend the perimeter. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, commanding the 1st Marine Division, faced the crisis Japanese planners anticipated. His September 12th situation report to Pacific Command painted a dire picture. Disease casualties now exceed combat casualties by 3 to 1. Malaria infection rate approaching 20% of division strength. Medical evacuation requirements compete with ammunition and food resupply. Without improved disease control measures, division combat effectiveness will collapse within 60 days. The Japanese may not need to attack, they can wait for disease to defeat us. This was precisely the scenario Japanese commanders expected. Let disease destroy American combat power, then recapture Henderson Field from weakened forces. The strategy seemed vindicated by Marine suffering. But transformation was already underway in American pharmaceutical plants and military medical laboratories. The U.S. government, recognizing that Japanese occupation of Java and Sumatra controlled 90% of global quinine supply, had initiated crash programs to develop synthetic antimalarial alternatives in early 1942. The breakthrough came through quinacrine, a synthetic antimalarial compound originally developed in Germany in the 1930s, under the name Atabrine. The drug had been known for years, but wasn't manufactured at industrial scale. German patents were seized, formulas were analyzed, and American pharmaceutical companies were mobilized for mass production. Winthrop Chemical Company, the American subsidiary that held rights to Atabrine, received government contracts in March 1942 to begin immediate scale-up of production. By June, the plant in Rensselaer, New York, was producing 500,000 tablets weekly. By August, production reached 1 million tablets daily. By October, when malaria was devastating Marines on Guadalcanal, production exceeded 3 million tablets daily. The Atabrine tablet, a small yellow pill containing 100 milliliters of quinacrine dihydrochloride, would become as important to Pacific victory as any weapon system. The drug provided effective malaria suppression when taken daily, preventing infection or reducing severity if infection occurred. Unlike quinine, which required large doses and was in short supply, Atabrine could be manufactured synthetically in unlimited quantities using American chemical industry. But production was only first challenge. The drug had to reach troops, had to be administered systematically, and required enforcing daily compliance among soldiers who resented the side effects. This demanded medical logistics operation as complex as ammunition supply. The U.S. Army Surgeon General's Office, under Major General Norman Kirk, established the Army Malaria Control Program in July 1942. The program combined pharmaceutical distribution, mosquito control, medical education, and enforcement mechanisms to prevent malaria from destroying American combat effectiveness in the Pacific. The pharmaceutical component was staggering in scale. By January 1943, the Army was distributing 100 million Atabrine tablets monthly to Pacific forces. By mid-1944, distribution exceeded 300 million tablets monthly. The tablets were packaged in individual daily doses, distributed through medical supply chains, and their consumption was made mandatory through military discipline. Brigadier General James Stevens Simmons, chief of the Preventive Medicine Division, explained the systematic approach in his October 1942 directive to Pacific commanders. Malaria control requires comprehensive program combining suppressive medication, mosquito elimination, protective equipment, and medical discipline. Every soldier will receive daily Atabrine tablet. Consumption will be supervised and enforced. Unit commanders will be held responsible for malaria rates as operational performance metric. Medical officers will implement mosquito control measures systematically. Failure to maintain disease discipline will result in relief from command. This represented revolutionary approach to military medicine. Previously, disease prevention was individual soldier responsibility. The new doctrine made disease control a command function, with officers evaluated on disease rates as strictly as combat performance. The enforcement mechanisms were comprehensive. Daily Atabrine distribution became part of unit routine, like morning formation. Medics observed soldiers taking tablets, swallowing, not concealing them. Unit sick call rates were tracked daily and reported through command channels. Commanders whose units showed high malaria rates faced investigation and potential relief. The systematic approach was first implemented comprehensively on Guadalcanal in November 1942. The 1st Marine Division, ravaged by malaria since August, received massive Atabrine supplies and strict orders on distribution discipline. New units arriving as reinforcements brought systematic malaria discipline from training. The results were dramatic. Marine malaria rates, which had reached 30% in October, dropped to 15% by December, despite continued exposure to infected mosquitoes. New units practicing Atabrine discipline from arrival showed infection rates under 5%. The disease that Japanese commanders expected to destroy American forces was being controlled through systematic medication. But Atabrine distribution was only one component of comprehensive malaria control. The American approach combined multiple interventions: suppressive medication, mosquito elimination through environmental modification, protective equipment including netting and repellents, and medical evacuation for acute cases. The mosquito control program employed industrial-scale environmental modification. Army engineers drained swamps, eliminated standing water, cleared vegetation near camps, and applied oil films to water surfaces, preventing mosquito larvae development. The 1st Marine Division's engineering log from December 1942 documented draining over 200 acres of swampland, clearing 50 miles of jungle perimeter, and establishing drainage systems diverting water from bivouac areas. DDT, the revolutionary insecticide developed in 1939 and proven effective against mosquitoes, became available to Pacific forces in 1943. The chemical was sprayed in living areas, applied to clothing and netting, and used for area treatment around military installations. DDT application reduced mosquito populations by 90% in treated areas. Colonel William Borden, commanding the 23rd Malaria Survey Unit, described the integrated approach in his January 1943 report from Guadalcanal. Malaria control requires systematic application of multiple interventions. Atabrine suppresses infection. DDT eliminates mosquito vectors. Environmental modification removes breeding habitat. Netting and repellent provide individual protection. Medical evacuation removes infectious reservoirs. No single intervention is sufficient, but comprehensive program combining all methods reduces malaria from campaign-ending catastrophe to manageable medical problem. Guadalcanal demonstrated this principle. August casualty rates were unsustainable. December rates, after implementing systematic controls, reduced disease casualties below combat casualties for first time in Pacific campaign. The Japanese, meanwhile, suffered malaria without systematic countermeasures. Japanese pharmaceutical industry couldn't match American Atabrine production. Quinine supplies, though Japan controlled producing regions, were insufficient for mass prophylaxis. Japanese military medical doctrine emphasized treating disease, not preventing it through systematic suppression. Japanese forces on Guadalcanal experienced catastrophic disease casualties. The 17th Army medical log, captured after Japanese evacuation in February 1943, documented malaria rates exceeding 85% among troops deployed over 3 months. Entire battalions were combat ineffective due to disease. Evacuation capacity was minimal. Sick soldiers remained in forward positions, spreading infection and dying in large numbers. Lieutenant Ito Masashi, medical officer with the 38th Division on Guadalcanal, described Japanese disease situation in his diary, captured in January 1943. November 15th, malaria has destroyed us more completely than American firepower. Of 850 men in the regiment, fewer than 200 are fit for combat. The rest suffer debilitating fever, unable to march, unable to fight. We have no quinine. We have no antimalarial medication. We can only watch men die. The Americans, we observe, seem less affected by disease now. They're sick or evacuated rapidly. Their medical supplies are abundant. They employ systematic measures we lack capacity to implement. The jungle that was supposed to destroy them has instead destroyed us. The strategic implications emerged clearly by early 1943. American forces, protected by systematic malaria control, could operate effectively in tropical environments indefinitely. Japanese forces suffered disease casualties that crippled combat effectiveness and couldn't be replaced. The natural advantage Japanese planners counted on had reversed completely. The New Georgia Campaign in June-August 1943 demonstrated American medical logistics superiority decisively. The 43rd Infantry Division, landing on New Georgia with comprehensive malaria discipline, maintained disease rates under 8% despite heavy mosquito exposure. Japanese forces defending the island suffered malaria rates exceeding 70%. Major General John Hester, commanding the 43rd Division, reported in August 1943. Disease casualties remain minimal due to systematic Atabrine discipline and mosquito control. Medical evacuation system functions efficiently, sick soldiers receive rapid treatment and return to duty. In contrast, intercepted Japanese communications report catastrophic disease casualties, crippling their defense. The medical advantage proves as decisive as firepower superiority. The pharmaceutical production supporting this advantage reached staggering scale. By mid-1943, American plants were producing over 100 million Atabrine tablets monthly. Winthrop Chemical's Rensselaer facility operated 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly, with 3 shifts of workers producing tablets continuously. Additional production came from Merck, Abbott Laboratories, and other pharmaceutical companies converted to antimalarial production. The total wartime production exceeded 2.5 billion Atabrine tablets, enough to provide daily prophylaxis to every American serviceman in the Pacific Theater for the war's entire duration, with substantial reserves. This industrial-scale pharmaceutical production had no equivalent in Japanese industry. Japanese attempts to develop synthetic antimalarials failed comprehensively. Research programs existed but never achieved mass production. Japan's chemical industry, focused on munitions and fuel, lacked capacity to divert resources to pharmaceutical production at American scale. Japanese forces remained dependent on limited quinine supplies inadequate for systematic prophylaxis. The medical logistics supporting Atabrine distribution proved equally impressive. The tablets required climate-controlled storage, high humidity degraded effectiveness. The U.S. Army Medical Department established refrigerated pharmaceutical depots throughout the Pacific, maintaining tablet potency in tropical conditions. Distribution chains delivered tablets to frontline units with reliability matching ammunition supply. Blood plasma logistics provided another example of American medical industrial supremacy. Whole blood couldn't be stored for extended periods, but plasma, blood's liquid component without cells, could be freeze-dried and reconstituted when needed. The American Red Cross established industrial-scale plasma collection and processing. By 1943, the U.S. military was shipping over 100,000 units of plasma monthly to the Pacific. Plasma saved lives by treating shock and blood loss until whole blood transfusion was possible. Japanese forces lacked equivalent capability. Wounded soldiers died from shock that American medical logistics prevented. Captain Charles Hogan, medical officer with the 1st Marine Division at Cape Gloucester in late 1943, described the comprehensive medical system. We have Atabrine preventing malaria, DDT eliminating mosquitoes, plasma treating shock, sulfa drugs preventing infection, rapid evacuation to hospital ships, and systematic public health discipline. Japanese wounded die in jungle. Our wounded reach surgery within hours. Japanese troops suffer disease without medication. Our troops receive prophylaxis, preventing infection. The medical advantage is overwhelming. The Bougainville Campaign, November 1943, March 1944, provided definitive demonstration of American medical superiority over Japanese forces relying on disease to defeat them. The 3rd Marine Division and 37th Infantry Division, landing on Bougainville with comprehensive malaria discipline, maintained disease rates under 10% throughout the campaign despite swampy terrain and heavy mosquito populations. Japanese defenders, the 6th Infantry Division and 38th Division, suffered malaria rates exceeding 80% by February 1944. Medical supplies were non-existent. Evacuation was impossible. Sick Japanese soldiers remained in positions unable to fight, spreading disease, dying slowly from complications. The casualty statistics told the story. American forces on Bougainville suffered 423 battle deaths and 1,318 disease evacuations during 4 months of operations. Japanese forces suffered approximately 8,500 battle deaths and estimated 15,000 disease deaths. Over 60% of their garrison killed by disease, the Americans successfully controlled. Major General Roy Geiger, commanding the I Marine Amphibious Corps on Bougainville, submitted after-action assessment in March 1944, highlighting medical factors. The enemy expected tropical disease to defeat us. Instead, systematic malaria control maintained combat effectiveness while disease destroyed Japanese garrison. Medical discipline proved as important as tactical superiority. The jungle that should have been our enemy became Japanese graveyard. By 1944, American medical logistics had expanded beyond malaria control to comprehensive tropical disease management. Dengue fever vaccines, though imperfect, provided some protection. Sulfa drugs, and eventually penicillin prevented bacterial infections. Systematic sanitation reduced dysentery. Fungal infection treatments were distributed widely. The medical supply chain supporting Pacific operations rivaled ammunition logistics in complexity. Hospital ships, mobile surgical hospitals, pharmaceutical depots, evacuation aircraft, and comprehensive medical training created system that kept American forces healthy and returned wounded to duty at rates Japanese couldn't match. The Philippines Campaign, October 1944, August 1945, demonstrated fully mature American medical logistics. The 6th Army, operating across multiple islands in tropical environment with heavy disease exposure, maintained overall disease rates under 5%. Malaria, the disease Japanese planners expected to destroy American forces, was reduced to minor nuisance. General Douglas MacArthur, returning to the Philippines, noted medical achievement in his November 1944 communique. The conquest of tropical disease represents victory as significant as any battlefield success. American forces operate effectively in an environment that would have incapacitated armies of previous generations. Medical science and industrial logistics have defeated malaria more completely than our arms defeated the enemy. Japanese medical collapse, conversely, accelerated through 1944-45. Pharmaceutical supplies were exhausted. Medical evacuation was impossible due to Allied naval and air superiority. Japanese soldiers suffered disease without treatment, died without evacuation, and were replaced by increasingly unhealthy reinforcements rushed forward without adequate medical preparation. The captured medical records from Japanese units in the Philippines revealed catastrophic conditions. The 14th Area Army Medical Log from January 1945 documented malaria infection rates of 92%, dengue fever at 65%, dysentery endemic, with no medications available for treatment. Of approximately 250,000 Japanese troops in the Philippines in late 1944, an estimated 150,000 died from disease and starvation. 60% of the force destroyed by the natural conditions they expected would defeat the Americans. The final campaigns, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, saw American forces operating with medical logistics approaching perfection. Disease casualties were minimal despite tropical exposure. Wounded received treatment within minutes. Medical evacuation by air meant soldiers injured on Okinawa could receive surgery in Guam within hours. The comprehensive medical system saved thousands of lives and maintained combat effectiveness at levels impossible without systematic medical logistics. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, American medical intelligence teams examined Japanese military medical facilities and interrogated Japanese medical officers. The disparity was overwhelming. Japanese pharmaceutical production had never exceeded 5 million antimalarial doses annually, less than American production in 2 weeks. Japanese medical logistics were primitive compared to American systematic supply chains. Lieutenant General Hyakutake Harukichi, whose confident August 1942 assessment predicted disease would destroy American forces on Guadalcanal, was captured in the Philippines in 1945. His interrogation by American medical intelligence officers, recorded in September 1945, revealed complete reversal of expectations. When Americans landed on Guadalcanal, I calculated disease would incapacitate them within 2 months. The historical precedent was clear. Western forces in tropics suffered catastrophic disease casualties. Our medical staff projected malaria rates would make American positions untenable. We were catastrophically wrong. American forces implemented systematic disease control we couldn't match. Their pharmaceutical industry produced antimalarial medication at scales we couldn't imagine. Their medical logistics delivered supplies to frontline troops with reliability we never achieved. Their enforcement of medical discipline was superior to our own. Most critically, Americans treated disease prevention as command responsibility rather than individual concern. Their officers were held accountable for unit disease rates. This systematic approach proved far more effective than our assumption that natural immunity and limited medication would suffice. By 1943, the situation had reversed. American forces operated effectively in tropical environments, while our forces suffered disease casualties exceeding combat losses. The jungle we expected to destroy them instead destroyed us. Disease, which should have been our strategic ally, became our executioner, while Americans controlled it through industrial-scale pharmaceutical production and systematic medical logistics. Colonel Horyuchi Toyokazu, the medical officer who projected American disease collapse, survived the war and was interviewed by U.S. Army Medical Department historians in 1947. His assessment acknowledged total failure of Japanese medical strategy. Japanese military medical doctrine was designed for temperate warfare with limited pharmaceutical production capacity. We assumed tropical diseases would affect Americans more severely than our forces, based on historical precedent of European failures in tropical environments. This assumption ignored American industrial capacity and systematic approach to medical logistics. They produced synthetic antimalarial drugs at rates we couldn't comprehend, billions of tablets when we could barely produce millions. They distributed these medications through logistics chains more reliable than our ammunition supply. They enforced medical discipline through command structure. The result was complete reversal of expected disease impact. American malaria rates dropped below 5%, while ours exceeded 80%. American wounded received rapid evacuation and advanced treatment. Our wounded died in jungle without medication or evacuation. American forces maintained combat effectiveness in tropical environment, while disease destroyed our combat power. The lesson is profound. Industrial capacity applied to medical logistics can overcome natural environmental advantages. We expected jungle to be our ally. American pharmaceutical production and systematic medical logistics neutralized that advantage completely. Disease, which should have defeated them, instead defeated us because we lacked industrial and organizational capacity to implement equivalent preventive measures. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Army Medical Department quantified the pharmaceutical achievement. Between 1942 and 1945, American industry produced 2.6 billion Atabrine tablets, 1.8 billion sulfanilamide tablets, 850 million vitamin supplements, 500,000 pounds of DDT powder, 300 million units of blood plasma, and countless bandages, surgical supplies, and medical equipment. This pharmaceutical production, combined with systematic distribution logistics and enforced medical discipline, reduced disease casualties from expected campaign-ending catastrophe to manageable medical challenge. Malaria, which should have killed tens of thousands of American soldiers, was controlled so effectively that total Pacific Theater malaria deaths numbered fewer than 2,000. Japanese forces lacking equivalent pharmaceutical production and systematic medical logistics suffered estimated 150,000, 200,000 disease deaths in Pacific campaigns, more than their combat deaths. The natural advantage they expected proved illusory against American industrial-scale medical intervention. The American Malaria Control in War Areas program, established during the war, became the foundation for post-war centers for disease control. The systematic public health approaches developed for military disease control were applied to civilian populations, eventually contributing to malaria eradication in the United States and many other regions. Dr. Lewis Williams, director of the Army Malaria Control Program, reflected in 1948, "The Pacific Campaign demonstrated that industrial-scale pharmaceutical production, combined with systematic public health logistics, can overcome diseases that have killed millions throughout history. We produced Atabrine at rates that made universal prophylaxis possible. We distributed it through logistics chains that reached every soldier. We enforced consumption through military discipline. The result was medical miracle. Malaria, which has destroyed armies since ancient times, was reduced to minor nuisance through systematic intervention. This wasn't medical genius, it was industrial production and organizational discipline applied to public health. The same approach that mass-produced aircraft and ammunition mass-produced pharmaceutical protection against disease." At the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C., an exhibit documents the Pacific Medical Campaign. A display case contains Atabrine tablets, DDT applicators, plasma containers, and medical supply catalogs. The scale of production is documented with photographs of pharmaceutical plants running 24-hour shifts, producing millions of tablets daily. The exhibit's central placard reads, "The defeat of tropical disease in the Pacific Campaign represented industrial and organizational triumph as significant as any military victory. American pharmaceutical mass production, systematic medical logistics, and enforced health discipline transformed malaria from campaign-ending catastrophe to controlled medical challenge. The disease that Japanese commanders expected to destroy American forces was instead defeated by tablets produced at rates of 3 million daily and distributed through logistics systems matching ammunition, supply, and reliability." August 7, 1942. Lieutenant General Hyakutake Harukichi confidently predicted tropical disease would destroy American forces on Guadalcanal within 2 months. His medical staff calculated malaria infection rates would render Marines' combat ineffective, allowing easy Japanese recapture of Henderson Field. Historical precedent supported this assessment. Western forces in tropics had always suffered catastrophic disease casualties. By December 1942, the projection had reversed completely. American Marines, protected by systematic Atabrine prophylaxis and comprehensive mosquito control, maintained disease rates under 15% and falling. Japanese forces suffered malaria rates exceeding 85% with no medication, no systematic prevention, and no capacity to implement American-style medical logistics. The natural advantage Japanese commanders expected, tropical disease destroying temperate climate American forces, evaporated before industrial-scale pharmaceutical production that created 2.6 billion Atabrine tablets and systematic medical logistics that delivered them to every American soldier in the Pacific. The disease that should have been Japan's strategic ally became their executioner, while Americans controlled it through mass production and disciplined administration. Lieutenant General Hyakutake's confident August assessment, "Disease will do our work," proved catastrophically incorrect. Disease did do work, but it destroyed Japanese forces who lacked pharmaceutical industry to produce synthetic antimalarials at scale, lacked logistics systems to distribute medication systematically, and lacked medical discipline to enforce preventive measures. The jungle that was supposed to defeat Americans instead became American-controlled environment where systematic medical intervention overcame millennia of disease supremacy. Japanese forces expected tropical environment to provide natural advantage. American pharmaceutical production at 3 million tablets daily proved that industrial capacity could overcome any natural advantage, that systematic logistics could deliver medical protection as reliably as ammunition, and that enforced health discipline could defeat diseases that had destroyed armies throughout human history.